What up, world? R.I.C.H coming right back at you. And today, we got to talk about the Trump administration, the president's house in Philadelphia, and this court ruling that allows them to replace an exhibit about 9 black people enslaved by George Washington. This was a federal court saying that the government has the right to change the exhibit. But just because something is legal, don't make it right. And what this feels like to me is simple. Slavery makes America look bad, so let's make slavery look smaller. That is a slap in the damn face, because slavery don't make America look bad because black people talk about it. Slavery makes America look bad because America did it. And the solution is not to hide the truth. The solution is to tell the whole truth and be man enough as a country to sit with it.
Tonight on Independence Mall, a piece of Philadelphia history was removed this afternoon by the federal government. Crews dismantled plaques telling the stories of the 9 enslaved people who lived in the president's house and were owned by President George Washington. Last year, President Trump ordered National Park staff to flag any displays that might be seen as disparaging to America's past. Philadelphia Mayor Sherelle Parker says the city is conducting a legal review of this tonight. An attorney who advocated for those plaques in 2010 called the removal, quote, outrageous and blatantly racist.
A federal appeals court has paved the way now for the Trump administration to install new exhibits at the president's house in Old City. The city sued to have the original panels put back in place. Yesterday, judges in Boston lifted a hold that was preventing the Trump administration from installing new panels at the site, which marks the location where George Washington lived. Today, the federal government asked the court to issue a final procedural order that would allow the installation of new panels to proceed. Critics say the removal attempts to erase the history of enslaved people who served at Washington's home. We're awaiting a response now from the city.
This is why this story matters. The president's house in Philadelphia is where George Washington lived when Philadelphia was the capital of the United States. So while America was building this image of freedom, black people were inside that same house being denied their own. That is not a side note. That is the contradiction at the center of this country. Men were talking about liberty while enslaved people were cooking their food, caring for their children, cleaning their rooms, and handling their horses. And now, years later, the government wants to tell that story in a way that puts more emphasis on America's achievements. But how do you talk about America's achievements while shrinking the people who were forced to help build them? Black people helped build this country. We were not just watching history happen. We were laboring inside of it. So when they remove or soften these stories, they are not just changing a display. They are changing memory. And that is dangerous, because once the government decides which parts of history makes America look bad, you are not preserving history anymore. You are protecting an image. And history is not supposed to be a commercial for America. History is supposed to be a record of what actually happened. So let's talk about who they are trying to make look smaller. Let's talk about Austin. He was a stable worker and a writer. He was Ona Judge's half-brother, and his life was tied to Washington's household, even though his freedom was not his own. Paris was a young stable hand. He was a boy caught inside a system that used his labor before he ever had a real chance to choose a life. Let's talk about Hercules, the cook. This man was skilled enough to prepare meals for the most powerful house in the country, but still had to escape because his talent didn't make him free. Christopher Sheels was Washington's personal assistant. He helped Washington dress and handle his daily needs, while the man he served was making sure other black people didn't get free. Richmond was Hercules' son. He was brought into that world as a child, which means slavery wasn't just stealing labor from adults. It was reaching into childhood. Giles, he worked with horses and carriages. He was part of the daily machinery that made the White House operate. Moll, she was a nursemaid to Martha Washington's grandchildren. A black woman trusted to care for white children, but not trusted with her own freedom. Let's talk about Joe. He worked in the household too. Like so many enslaved people, his story is partly buried because the country didn't care enough to fully record the lives of people it used. And then there is Ona Judge. Ona Judge was Martha Washington's personal maid. She was young, she was enslaved, and she was living in a city where black people around her were walking around free. Think about what that does to a person. You are serving the presidential family, but right outside that house, you can see people who look like you living in freedom that you're being denied. And in 1796, during a presidential family dinner, Ona Judge slipped out and took her freedom. She did not ask George Washington to recognize her humanity. She left, and Washington didn't respond like some great man who understood the contradiction. He tried to get her back. He used his power, his connections, and his position to try to return a black woman to bondage. That's the part they don't want too loud, because that don't fit the school book version of Washington. But that is why this exhibit matters. It forces people to understand that American greatness and American sin were living in the same house.
The Trump administration has a plan to remove a photograph from 1863, a photograph that became a powerful symbol of the evils of slavery. This image, known as the scourged back, is one of the most important and recognizable pieces of the Civil War era, and it depicts the horrific conditions and generational trauma enslaved Americans endured. And now this photo, among dozens of exhibits related to slavery, is set to be removed by multiple national parks.
One, the reason they're removing it is the same reason that we know that photo so well, which is this was a photo that really galvanized the abolitionist movement because it showed that slavery was not just a system of forced labor, but that it required a great deal of barbarism, that there was torture, that there was constant threat of violence and actual violence. And so this really exposed the mythology of the South, Southern white people who were trying to say, you know, this was a benign system of labor and it wasn't anything like the abolitionists were saying. So that's the same reason, that's the same instinct that drives the attempted removal of that photo now, is it tells us something very core about our history. It penetrates that mythology about what America is and what America was founded on. And so that's highly offensive to someone who is trying to become an authoritarian. You have to control the past. I mean, Jason Stanley in his book, How Fascism Works, talks about how strong men create this idea of a mythic past. And that mythic past is about greatness of those in power and really justifies the society that they're trying to build. So to answer your second question, I don't know that the people who began the CRT propaganda campaign knew they would be this successful. But certainly this was, in their wildest dreams, the end result of that campaign, which was to turn things that were just teaching of history into something that was up for debate or that should be erased or eliminated and minimized. And I don't think they knew it would go this far, but it always was going to be the end result, right? Telling people what histories you can learn, what you can and cannot talk about, not just banning ideologies, but banning how we teach about history, particularly Black people. Many of us tried to warn that this is where it was going to ultimately end up.
The part that really bothers me is how they try to make erasure sound reasonable. They say they're not removing slavery completely. They say they're just rebalancing the story. They say they want to highlight America's achievements. But that is how you sanitize history without admitting you sanitizing it. You don't have to remove every mention of slavery to disrespect the story. You can just take the teeth out of it. You can make it less direct. You can make it less accusing. You can make it easier for people to walk past without feeling anything. And that is the problem. Some history should make you feel something. And if you learn that George Washington rotated enslaved people out of Pennsylvania to avoid them becoming free, that should bother you. That was not an accident. That was strategy. That was a powerful man using a legal loophole to keep Black people enslaved while living in a city where freedom was right there in front of them. That's sick. So why would that be too harsh to tell? Why are we more worried about protecting Washington's image than protecting Ona Judge's truth? Why do the feelings of dead presidents get more care than the humanity of people they held in bondage? That is what this really comes down to. America wants Black contribution without Black pain. It wants the buildings, the culture, the labor, the patriotism, the music, the athletes, the soldiers, and the votes. But when it's time to tell what was done to us, now the story is too negative. Now it makes the country look bad. Now it needs to be more uplifting. No. The uplifting part is not that America was perfect. The uplifting part is that Ona Judge escaped. The uplifting part is that Hercules escaped. The uplifting part is that these 9 people had names, skills, families, courage, and humanity in a system that was built to strip it all away. That is a story worth telling. And this is bigger than just George Washington. This is about any president, any executive, any administration, any powerful person who did wrong and then gets protected by a cleaner version of history. If a president enslaved people, teach it. If a founder used loopholes to keep people in bondage, teach it. If America built wealth off Black labor, teach it. Because a country that only teaches the good part is not teaching history. It is teaching propaganda. And let me say this to people who think this is just about some science. It's not just about science. A sign at a historic site tells people who matters. It tells a child who deserves to be remembered. So when you change those signs, You are not just changing words. You are changing who gets to stand in the memory of the country. And black people have been pushed out of too much history already. We are not going to sit quiet while the story of enslaved people at George Washington's mansion gets made more comfortable for people who don't want to feel guilty. Guilt is not the point. Truth is the point. If the truth makes you uncomfortable, that don't mean the truth is wrong. It may mean you are finally seeing it clearly. This is why I get so tired of people acting like telling the ugly parts of American history means you hate America. A person who loves the truth doesn't hide evidence. A person who loves history does not erase the people who suffer. A person who loves freedom should be able to say slavery was evil without needing to protect the reputation of the men who benefited from it. That's not anti-American. That's honesty. And if America is as strong as people claim it is, then it should be strong enough to handle the truth itself. So I'm going to take y'all out like this. The court may have given the Trump administration the legal ruling to replace the exhibit, but legal power does not erase moral responsibility. These 9 people deserve more than a softened version of their suffering. Austin, Paris, Hercules, Christopher Sheels, Richmond, Giles, Ona Judge, Moll, and Joe were not background characters in George Washington's story. They were human beings who lived inside the contradiction of American freedom. And Ona Judge was not just a woman who ran away. She was a woman who saw freedom, who wanted freedom, who took freedom, and refused to give it back to the first president of the United States. That is history. That is powerful. And that is America. And if that story makes the country look bad, then maybe the country should have done better instead of asking black people to remember less. But hey, that's just my opinion. What's yours? Like, comment, subscribe. Establish Rich. I'll be back with another one. Peace.